But again, let's get back with the lecture. Now we're going to touch a little about the history of these things. The transparency that I have here is Giuseppe de Copertino, which was a Catholic saint from Italy. He was from the 17th century, and he showed the phenomenon of levitation. It's a very good example of psychic phenomena being reported before there were any systematic investigations. Also, having said that, in his period, during the 17th century, the Catholic Church was active collecting all kinds of accounts for the processes of canonizations and beatification. And they could be considered maybe the first systematic psychical researchers. But there was nothing like organized parapsychology, so a lot of the phenomena that are reported occur in contexts like this. He lived in a monastery, and where he was praying or when he was walking, there was one point where he was going to meet the wife of a Spanish ambassador. It was around 1642. He had talked with the ambassador before. The wife wanted to meet him. He had the reputation of being the flying monk. And because the things like this happen. The church, and the account says he saw the statue of the Virgin Mary that was inside the church. And then he fell into ecstasy, which is a kind of a type of trance mystical experience that a lot of saints get just by the inspiration of seeing the Holy Mother. And the next thing that happens is that he starts flying. And these two witnesses, they see that, they are amazed, and he lands a few feet down there. They live quietly, in great reverence, and no conversation takes place. But that's a typical example of the things that are reported there. These are psychic phenomena being reported before there is systematic parapsychology. Next one, which is another example of the same. Sadducismus Triumphatus was a book published also in the 17th century by Joseph Glanville. Joseph Glanville was a British cleric, and he has a lot of writings about religion. And in this one, what he does is he explores the phenomena of witchcraft and hauntings, poltergeists, and things like that. This book, there are several editions. This is from the 1642 edition, which yesterday I just found that is online. There is an online scan version of this 1682 edition with all these same pictures. It's great. Those of you interested, I will give you the web address. You can get there and see the pictures even better than when you see them here. But this book, basically, in this illustration, there are different type of phenomena. The lower one here is the appearance of an angel, which in those days seemed to also be reported. There is a levitation of someone on the diagonal here. Apparitions of other supernatural beings, mainly demonic entities. There was a healer on the top right part. These are phenomena that he was collecting, from the traditions in his times, and his argument was, these things are real, and they show there is a human spirit. God sometimes allows these things to happen. Next one. The first movement that brings together a lot of these traditions together and makes systematic study possible is the so-called movement of mesmerism, which starts in the 18th century. The man there is a representation of Franz Anton Mesmer, which was a physician that lived in Austria, in Germany, in France, and he moved all around. Sometimes he had to move because they were persecuting him, or he was going to be thrown in jail, or all kinds of problems. But Mesmer comes with an idea that he calls animal magnetism that proves very important for later parapsychology. Animal magnetism was a universal force. Let me read you a statement that I'm taking from a book first published in French in 1779. That he talks about the discovery of animal magnetism. Here he defines it as, there are 27 propositions. I have here number 1, number 2, and number 9. Number 1 says, there exists a mutual influence between heavenly bodies, the earth, and animate bodies. 2, a universally distributed and continuous fluid, which is quite without vacuum and of an incomparably rarefied nature, and which by its nature is capable of receiving, propagating, and communicating all the impressions of movement, is the means of this influence. So you can see the language is a little different because it comes from the 18th century. He says, it is particularly manifest in the human body that the agent, this fluid, has properties similar to those of the magnet. Different and opposite poles may likewise be distinguished, which may be changed, communicated, destroyed, and strengthened. So basically the idea, he says, is that there is a force all around us that binds the planets but also affects the human bodies, is inside our bodies, has polarity like physical magnetism. And he goes on to say, I can use that force, like we see here, to produce all kinds of phenomena. And here we have one of the first widely used techniques to induce trances, phenomena of healing, and all kinds of other phenomena. He said, you see the dots between his hands and this lady here, that he could, by magnetic passes, because he believed animal magnetism, later people just refer to it as magnetism. He said, I can, by moving my hands about someone, I can make them fall in trance, I can make them recollect things that they don't remember, I can ask them to mentally visit a different place, far away, and come back and tell me what was happening out there. This is Mesmer in 1779, and it's one of his later books. He has some books that go before, at least by 10 years. Mesmer was tremendously influential in that idea, starting in France. A lot of people, many of them physicians, are believers of this animal magnetism because they found that when they have patients that come to them that have headaches, all kinds of other disorders, including blindness and all kinds of other things, they, by doing procedures like this, say that they can cure them. So it becomes a means of helping people, at the same time making money. Because if you read the biographies of Mesmer, one of the things he was always after was getting recognition and money for his discovery. And that's the problem. Here where you see the human aspect of someone that did something and obviously started a movement, but he had an ego extremely big. He had to be recognized as the guy that brought these ideas to the world, and he wanted compensation for it. So he was always going after money from the government, from other people. He had fights with almost anyone that was associated with him. That's a problem, you know, when things like that get mixed with all this psychic stuff. But it's a beginning of observations of all kinds of people in trance and all kinds of psychic phenomena. They discover, as they start doing a lot of experiments like this, that the people that they hypnotize, and the word hypnosis or hypnotizing comes later. It's more from in the 1840s that, and even later than that the word hypnosis comes to use. Hypnosis is a different explanation of this phenomena. Later on, what people said is there is no force, no animal magnetism, it's only suggestion and imagination. And that's what hypnosis really is. It's trying to explain all this old phenomena, but saying, no, there is no animal magnetism. This force that you see there, that doesn't exist. What happened is that Mesmer impressed the idea on this lady to fall into a trance, and that suggestion is what made her fall into the trance. And that's what hypnosis is today. Almost no one that does hypnosis, especially clinical hypnosis, believes in this model. But in the late 18th century and in most of the 19th century, especially up to the 1870s, there was a lot of practice, France being the main country, but also England, the States, Germany, all kinds of places. These phenomena were being observed. They discovered that there could be transfer of sensations. If the mesmerizer tries something sweet in his mouth, the person in trance will say, I feel like candy, I feel sweetness in my mouth. So they did all kinds of things like that and have a lot of records of fascinating phenomena. In the next one is still Mesmer with a device that he called the baquet. Mesmer believed this was a physical energy, so he constructed kind of a big tub that inside had a lot of pieces of glass and metal, and it has metal rods coming from it. All of that was encased kind of in a round thing that you see there. People could touch those metal bars, or there were ropes attached that will go out, like you see people there holding. And the idea was he will put his magnetic force in there, and the people that will come around touching it will fall into trance. Some of them will have convulsions, dancing like they're doing there. And it was a real spectacle. People loved to see that. It was the type of thing that they were describing in the newspapers and literary magazines as Mesmer has a field day, and there were all kinds of things of sexual innuendo that he used his magnetic powers to seduce young women or men, or all kinds of things. It was a fascinating thing from the point of view of controversy, but it really got into society. People like Benjamin Franklin at one point became involved in a systematic investigation, and they didn't believe in the force, the magnetic force. But it was something that attracted attention. For our purposes, the important thing is that not only were there all these convulsions and trances, but there were what we will call psychic phenomena, healings and telepathy at a distance, all kinds of fascinating phenomena similar to out-of-body experiences, including phenomena of mediumship. That's something that is not so widely remembered, but in some of these magnetic subjects, they not only had telepathic phenomena, but some of them said that they traveled to dimensions when they met spiritual entities, when they saw spirits of the dead. And later on, that gets together with the movement of spiritualism that we will get now into. The mesmeric movement continue, well, some will say that it's still around today, but it was strong still in the 1870s. By the end of the 19th century, it had declined for sure, but there were still a lot of serious people believing in it. And even in the 1920s, especially in France, France is the magnetic country par excellence, because they had more ideas about animal magnetism than any other country in the world. For some reason there, things develop much more. And even into later years, there are still books and things being published. But what happens is that eventually the movement of spiritualism displaces the movement of mesmerism. And there's kind of a union of both. Spiritualism is a movement that basically says spirits are real, they can communicate with us, they can influence us. You can go to mediums and you can communicate with people that have died. The whole idea here is like the big spiritual brother, watching over us, which it wasn't a very common idea in the 19th century. But what spiritualism was very different was that they believed that they were an empirical movement, for some an empirical religion, meaning while many of the other sects of Christianity, you had to have faith. You had to have faith in Jesus, in God, in whatever. Faith is the main thing. The spiritualist will tell you, with us it's very easy, you don't have to have faith. You just see and touch with your own senses, and you make up your mind. So what they say, we have all kinds of phenomena, if I can get the next one, all kinds of phenomena that you will see, and if they'll convince you, there is evidence of a spiritual world. You don't have to believe in the Bible or so, just by faith. And these phenomena show that there are spirits that are coming and acting through mediums. That was what they were saying. And a lot of people, that's what they did. They went to these places, like the old mesmeric seances. These things also came into society like a fad. There were all kinds of people that instead of reading poetry or the things that they will do normally, they will hold now seances, because that was the new thing to do. Because we're talking about the upper middle classes mainly. This is D.D. Hume, a very famous medium born in Scotland originally, but that traveled all around in Europe, in the States. Hume was mainly a physical medium that produced all kinds of physical phenomena like movement of tables, of objects, things like that. Here is the phenomenon of the table levitation shown by him. This is what the spiritualists will say, come and see it, and you will see this guy floating in the air. You don't have to have faith. You either see it or you don't, and that's it. It's as simple as that. Sometimes the light will not be extremely, not as good as what we have now, but it was enough to see him floating. He most of the time will take a pencil and will do little X's, so that the poor owner of that place, will have the place full of X's, all around, because he will move around and will be doing that. But that was the physical evidence that he was actually there. He will do all kinds of things and move around and come from another window. When he was on the floor, he will interact with the sitters. He will talk about spirits around him, but he will also do things like go to the fire. If it was winter and they have a charcoal fire, he will go in and take a piece of charcoal in his hand, very hot, and will just hold it and will put it in his face and will do all kinds of things, and he will not get burned. And then he will get the sitter close to them and saying, come here. And the sitters, that's when they were really frightened, because they knew that they were going to have to hold the coal in their hands. But in many cases, those that went, some of them declined, but those that extended their hands, I don't remember reading any account of them being burned. Many of them just hold it and they said, oh, it feels warm, but no. One guy was putting his head, and the medium got his hair and put all the hair around the coal. All kinds of things like that. And supposedly no one got burned. He said that the spirits gave him a force, and he transferred that force to the people around him, and they could not get it burned. The next one. Again, phenomena that were easily seen. This is the same medium, Hume, and this is one of the, we're talking about 1871, 1872, the physicist William Crookes, well known in the history of physics, especially in England, gets interested in this phenomenon and decides, I'm going to look into them. And comes in and tries to bring his training as a physicist. And he asked Hume, will you help me? And Hume said, sure. And Hume came and did everything Crookes asked for. Here is a test. Hume said that there was an accordion, just a normal accordion, that used to play by itself in the seances. So the accordion was in the middle of the table, and people will hear in semi-darkness this thing, and will see it move and will hear sounds. What Crookes did is saying, okay, I want you to be holding the accordion, and there is an accordion inside this basket, this wire basket. You cannot see it clearly, but there is an accordion there. He's holding the accordion with the keys that produce the sound on the lower side. So he cannot produce it there. One hand on top of the table, the basket goes under. The basket has wire around, and he connected an electrical current. So that it's all electrified going around. The idea being, he thinks like a physicist, saying, okay, if there is a real force here, maybe the electrical current will stop the phenomena, or something will happen, and then I will know from the physical point of view what type of force I'm talking about. I mean, that's part of the thing that physicists do. They study forces in relation to each other, gravity, to distance, to all kinds of things. So that's what Crookes tries to do. It's one of the first systematic attempts to bring science into this phenomena. And he says that he started in plain light. The accordion started producing noises that he could never reproduce by holding the accordion like that. And that at one occasion, Hume withdrew the hand, and he said the accordion still stayed in the basket, moving by itself, which was very common in the seances that he gave. But it's important because of Crookes. He brings the more systematic account. He conducted a lot of different tests with all kinds of instruments, and he believed that there was a psychic force coming from these medium's hands that could travel through all kinds of materials and move objects. The next one. We were saying about how spiritualists emphasize what one author called the proof palpable of immortality, meaning you can touch the spirits. They're here for you to touch and squeeze. And that's what a lot of people did. And this is an example of the phenomenon of materialization, which to this day is extremely controversial. This is one of the most controversial materialization cases in recorded history. This is the apparition of Cathy King. Cathy King was an entity that came through Florence Cook, a British medium. And this is supposedly the materialized spirit, the theory being that spirits don't have matter of their own, but if you have a good physical medium, being defined a physical medium as a person that can put his own or her own energy at the service of spirits, the spirit will come close to the medium, will use the medium's energy, and that energy is transformed into a temporary body, which is what you see there. That's, in simple terms, is the spiritualist idea. So why this is happening, supposedly the medium is inside the cabinet, which was a corner, like this corner here where I'm standing, but with a dark curtain that will close it here. And the medium will be sitting here in trance, because the expense of putting out all that energy is so much that the trance helps her to do it, to put the energy out. When then the spirit appears, comes out, this is a physician who is taking the pulse of the figure. And from the account, not only of the physician or many others, they said that they could not distinguish this from a normal figure, which again was so controversial because at the time there were many mediums that were caught in fraud. You know, a lot of these performances, there was always a wise guy that said, no, this cannot be it. And the guy will jump and grab the spirit. Someone will turn the lantern on. And sure enough, you know, it was a fraudulent performance. There was the medium with a disguise, and they will take out the hairpiece, and they will. That happened frequently. So these kind of things were really controversial. But a lot of spiritualists still believe that this particular phenomenon was real, especially with this medium. And you know, there was a lot of imitators as time came by. Spiritualism basically continues developing from the 1840s here in the States. It moves into England, Europe. But what is important is that spiritualism inspired a group of people in London in 1882 to form the Society for Psychical Research. And that is what historians generally consider to be probably the most important point of the early history of parapsychology. It's a society that is formed with a combination of scientists, literary people, but also spiritualists. We cannot forget the spiritualist contribution, which was important. And what they try to do is similar to small societies that have existed before. They want to collect information, do experiments, do something systematic to study all the stuff we have been talking about. The materializations, the communications, the poltergeists, the hauntings. And from the beginning, what they do, this is the proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research that starts in 1882. We have a complete set here from the first to the more recent one. What they establish is a series of committees of investigation. So they have the Thought Reading Committee, which is a committee to investigate telepathy. The term telepathy is coined in 1882 by Frederick Myers, one of their main members. A lot of the terms that we use today come from there. A lot of the concepts that we have about the mind come from members of this society. So they form all these groups and they start doing reports. One of them is about ghosts, haunted houses, telepathy. And they start making systematic studies that slowly get better as they get more experience and compile a lot of evidence for psychic phenomena. I can get the next one. This is a very early, from the 1880s, telepathy study, which basically is, the target is what someone was trying to send mentally. The response on the right is what someone drew in response. And this was the way telepathy was studied in those days, you know, just to see if there was a transmission of some sort. And these, of course, are the hits, the good results. There were others that were not as good. But the idea is there, you know, like you see the horse is really, this is certainly not a horse, but you can see the eye and you can see that it resembles some type of animal. It's very typical of telepathic drawing that sometimes you get just one aspect and not the whole thing. But it's enough to give you an idea. The next one. Within the Society for Psychical Research, as well as outside, we're talking about the 1880s, 1890s. That is the golden period, not only of psychical research, which started in England but then spread into some other countries, particularly in France, but also of hypnosis. Hypnosis had changed from the old mesmeric movement, and now a lot of the people that are involved do not believe in animal magnetism. Also, there were still some of those ideas. But there is so much interest in hypnosis from the clinical point of view. In France, people like Charcot, a famous neurologist, start studying hysteria in clinics in Paris and in other places in France. He has a lot of followers that find out that hysterics are very easily hypnotizable. And in the process of studying them, they start inducing all kinds of phenomena, from the more strangest things that you can think, including a lot of parapsychological phenomena. One of the things that they do is the transfer of symptoms or perceptions from the right to the left side of the body. By that is meant, you have a person that they put under hypnosis and they have a pain in this arm. They come with a magnet and they put a magnet on the right side and then put it on the left, and the next thing they know, the pain is on the left side and it's not on the right. Or they hypnotize the person and they tell them, you are going to hallucinate, you're going to have a vision, but your vision will be perceived only with the right eye. So, you know, when you close the right eye, you don't see it. but you see it only with the right eye. Then they use the magnet, and all of a sudden, they perceive that vision only with the left. Only with the left. But that's only with the use of the magnet. They believe that the magnet has specific properties. From there, inside the body, they move even further, and they say, okay, if we can do that inside the body of someone, right to left, maybe we can do it from one person to the other. So they basically go, from one person that has a headache, and they devise some type of metal crown. It started getting very complicated with all kinds of devices. They put it on the person, and then they take it to another person, and they transfer that. Again, with the idea that there is some energy that can transfer pain and sensations and the like. That was the type of thing that the French loved to do, and was bordering between psychiatry and normal psychology and parapsychology. There was a lot of that kind of stuff at the time. And as you can see, there a lot of interest in hypnosis, as well as some work on mediumship, not all of which was favorable for mediumship. You have a lot of the French work, like the one on top, that's Pierre Janet, very, very famous and influential psychologist and physician in France, who believed that mediums were basically hysterics. And there was nothing real, that the objects really did not move, there were no real communications, there was no real telepathy. He was in disagreement with Myers and the other people from the society in London. And he said it was all pathology. And he developed his idea. So all these currents were going at the same time, but regardless if they believed that it was real or not, there was a lot of interest in the 19th century that led to all kinds of studies. Some of them said that under hypnosis, and there was the work of someone called Albert de Rochat, a French researcher again, that said that once I hypnotize subjects or people, he will say, I can project out of their body their sensibility. And by that he meant that the nervous force that was believed at the time that is involved in sensations of touch or of pain could be projected out of the body in layers, and those are the lines you see there. Up to the point that he said, I can come with a pin and kind of prick, and the person will feel pain 6 inches from the body. That was again part of what was happening at the time, believing that hypnosis could produce strange phenomena. And that was really widely spread all through the French literature and some other European literature also. Mediumship still was going strong. This is the famous Eusapia Palladino. Palladino was an Italian medium that came from a peasant environment. She was not educated. She didn't know how to read or write. Also, she learned at one point to sign her name. And but being someone of no education and no social connections and all that, she was hanging with the greatest scientists of Europe because of her mediumistic abilities. Basically, she was a physical medium. The classic performance, and this is around 1907, she was performing between the 1890s to around 1910 when she came to New York, and it was a big controversy. But anyhow, this is basically what she did. This Palladino is this one here in the center. And people will sit around on a table, and the table will move. But also people will feel touches. They will say they will see hands that will appear. And she was a fascinating medium, but very difficult to work with because she was very temperamental. And she was caught in fraud many times. So there is no question to anyone that is interested in her that on occasions in darkness, she will go and touch someone and just very quickly do like that. Or she was being controlled by people on the right and on the left. So, one guy will have a hand here and the other guy will have a hand here. And then in her trance, she will have movements and convulsions. And as she was going like that, slowly, a few inches at a time, she will bring her hands closer. And the next thing you knew, he had the hand of the controller here, holding the hand of the other controller. So they were holding each other's hands, and she had a hand free, and she would grab the mandolin or the musical instruments that were on the table and make sounds or touch people or pound the tables, and some of these seances were in great darkness, so people could not see that. And she was very skillful in doing that. She had really learned how to. Some people said that she did it on purpose. Others said, no, it was unconscious. It was during the trance. I think there is evidence for both, Because certainly she was very clever and she knew what she was doing. And she got well paid by a lot of these people. We're talking about people like Charles Richet, that came to be Nobel Prize in Physiology later in the century, Myers from England, all kinds of investigators that were kind of the elite of science in Italy, where she came from, France and England, and even some other places. But no matter with all those problems, all of these scientists that sat with her, with very few exceptions, became convinced physical phenomena happen around her. They said, we know that she cheats. We are taking precautions about that. We are holding her in different ways. We're having observers, all kinds of precautions taken out. And sometimes when she's here, a wardrobe in that corner starts moving towards us. Explain how taking a hand out, with a little thread, can she pull a wardrobe that weighs a lot? So, they made a lot of arguments, and a lot of the reports are very interesting. Today, she's still controversial, People get polarized. Yes, she was a fraud. No, she was real, or both. But it's typical of what's happening. A lot of mediums do the same thing as she did. Moving on in time, this is around 1919 in Poland. This is the medium Franek Kluski. Mainly a materialization medium. Things appear around him. And it's typical of what you will see coming from Europe at that time period. This is the medium here. You see his hands. And this here is kind of a very misty and tenuous phantom that materialized with, I don't know what that will be, two big eyes. Or the book that I got this from doesn't even explain what that was, except to say that they believe it was genuine. Because all the materializations are even more strange. And you see this bearded guy here. The marks appear later after they develop the plate. They don't know what happened. It got scratched, the plate. So all photographic plates. I'm showing this not to defend this phenomena, because certainly a lot of these things are dubious, some of them better than others, but to show you the context of the times. This is what psychical research was at that time period. We have been talking about physical mediums. This is Eileen Garrett, which was a mental medium and the founder of this organization. In the next transparency, it summarizes a lot of the things that were done with him between about the 1920s and the 1960s. And this is another thing that psychical researchers were very interested in doing. With Mrs. Garrett, they studied veridical statements made during the trance. Meaning, when she was in trance, or the things that she was saying, could they check them out? If she mentioned a name, did that name really correspond with someone that had died? That's what I mean veridical, that they were truthful, things that you can check out. Because a lot of mediums talk a lot or give you a history of humanity or all kinds of things in automatic writing, but it's nothing that you can verify. It's all highly philosophical. But she was very specific. They did card guessing tests, and that comes more in the next period of parapsychology. But they studied the psychology of her trance personalities, the physiology of her trance state. A medium is a great laboratory for research because there are so many things that you can do with them, provided that they're willing to help. Garrett was unique in the sense that she really wanted to help science. So she allowed herself to be studied by all kinds of procedure, and everyone was always impressed with her abilities. The next. But after all these mediumship studies, what we see is a big change in parapsychology. Just as the Society for Psychical Research changed the context of what was happening in psychical research at the time, when they came, they made things more systematic. Now, at Duke University, we have Dr. J.B. Ryan, training botany. He comes with his wife, Loisa, training in the same field, having had experiences with mediums, but they were disappointed by certain negative experiences that they had with mediums, and they want to do something different. And eventually, they start doing the famous card test, the ESP card test. This is a very early study with children. The one on the right side is J.B. Ryan's daughter. I'm not sure about the one on the left. She's in her, I guess, 60s now, and he's 70s, and he's still active in the field. But basically here, that's an example of what they did. They used cards to test all kinds of people for ESP. They got children. Do children have ESP? They got blind people. They got American Indians. They got anyone they could lay their hands on. The whole idea being how distributed are these abilities. Do men have it better than women? And generally they found that no big differences between the different groups. Next. But the important thing to notice is there's no longer any seance phenomenon, no more darkness. All of these studies are evaluated only statistically. While the studies of the mediums were evaluated in a very qualitative way, you get a name and the person say, oh yeah, that's my uncle. That was validation. Here, they basically count the cards and they made statistical analysis of the results. This is another early test where you have the experimenter on the right and the subject on the left. The next one. Here is J.B. Rhine is this one here. Kind of a middle-aged J.B. Rhine. He got in from the 1920s. He was already interested in these things, and he died in 1980. Here he's studying psychokinesis. Just as he used the ESP cards for ESP, he used the dice for PK or psychokinesis. And here what you can see are the machines that were used. They put dice there, and that machine will go around, and then it will settle, and you will count, the numbers that when the dice settle. The idea being we don't want to rely only on someone doing it by hand, because we know there are very skillful people that by hand maybe they can commit fraud or could be mistakes. They were trying to control for possible sources of error, and they kept getting good results. Again, very controversial. The American psychological community was always against him. Many battles, many controversies. But that's the history of this field, and it's always like that. Rhine established an experimental tradition that eventually, even after he died, continued. This is an example of later work. This is a dream ESP work that was done by Montague Altman, Stanley Kriebner, and a few others. The whole idea being you bring into the laboratory someone that will sleep for one night or maybe several nights. She will have a dream, and at the same time she's dreaming, they have in a different room a target or a picture or something, hoping that the content of her dream will have a telepathic content or something that someone was looking or doing in a different room at a distance. They are drawing from the old tradition that dreams are very sensitive to telepathic information, something that comes from previous centuries. And they have amazingly good results. Results are published everywhere in psychiatry journals, psychology journals, parapsychology in the journals. And it's very important in the modern period of parapsychology, but still carrying the experimental tradition that Rhine had started in the 30s and carried up till the 50s and the 60s. And to end with this one, and this will be discussed in more detail by Nancy, this is what we call the Ganzfeld, which is recent, comes mainly from the 70s, experimental technique, and when you bring people to the lab and you try to combine all the ideas about the influence of altered states of consciousness, like dreams, meditation, hypnosis, the all ideas of hypnosis that I mentioned, and you try to induce a state that is not a deep trance state, but it's kind of an altered state, by controlling the things that people see and hear. Ganzfeld, well, Nancy will get more in detail later, but what they're doing there is by putting ping pong balls, halves of ping pong balls in her eyes, they control her vision. That means she cannot see anything except the white field of ping pong ball. Whatever she looks inside there, it's all white, it's all white. They put the headphones and they put a white noise, a sound like this all the time. What tends to happen is that after a few minutes of being in this state where you cannot hear anything specific, you cannot see anything specific, your mind goes inward and you start generating images, most of which come from your own memory, your own experience. When I have been in the Ganzfeld, my memories are of what I have been doing the day before, things like that. But the theory being that while you're in that state, someone in a different room is sending you a message telepathically, and images may be able to capture that message more easily than if you were just awake or, in a normal state. But this is again another example of the modern control experimentation that comes from the tradition of J.B. Rhine and still dominates the field today. There is still some Ganzfeld work being done, and even if the studies are done today, most of them are not Ganzfeld. The experimental approach is what is mainly used in this field. Some people still do hauntings, poltergeist, mediums, but that's, I would say 15% of the field or something like that. The rest is mainly laboratory, statistically evaluated experiments. And that is, it's a very short general overview about the history of the field. As you can see, it comes to different emphasis on different types of phenomena, different types of techniques. But the spirit is always the same, and that is the systematic exploration of these phenomena that look so mysterious. In fact, the whole point is to make them non-mysterious, because a lot of people, or those of us that are in the field, we don't see this as supernatural or strange in any way. They are mysterious in the sense that we don't know their nature. We don't understand them. A lot of that is because we have not done enough science to understand them. Many other areas of psychology, of physics, or other, there are many areas where we lack knowledge as well. And this is all an attempt just to take it out from religion, from philosophy. I mean, it's okay if you want to do a religion, that is your business. But if it's a human experience, it needs to be understood much better. We need to know what is happening, because there are a lot of people that need answers. There are a lot of people that have concerns, that are afraid about their experiences, they need guidance. A lot of good results or good things could come if we really had more knowledge about this. And this is what all this history really is all about. It may look very dramatic at some points, like with the mediums. Sometimes you lose your way and you get a lot of fraud and problems. But in the long run, what it shows is a search to understand, not just to venerate the supernatural and the marvelous, but to respect it as a human experience and then do something to make sense out of it.
Hi there, my name is Lisa Coley and I serve as president of Parapsychology Foundation. I want to welcome you to the Foundation's YouTube channel. There's already a wealth of information available posted, and we have plans to continue to post our classic lectures and new materials, so you don't want to miss out. So hit that bell, please subscribe, and you'll be notified, and hope you enjoy.